Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. In a recent case I shared from the Rendlesham forest area, a man near the UFO statue saw a strange tall figure watching him from the trees after a strange silence descended on the woods and he started to feel unnerved. After his encounter aired, a number of people reached out to me and shared their experiences when they visited Rendlesham Forest, and some of those visits happened just this month. So Zoltan G said, there are certain parts of the forest that feel really strange. We had a very odd experience there once with a chap that seemed to just appear almost from nowhere, and he just vanished again in front of us without a trace. Phil Cotwell said, I was there at Rendlesham last week, caught an interesting orb anomaly on camera. I'm going through footage because a follower on TikTok saw an odd figure in a tree watching me. Kind of interesting. And Alex Lovelock said, I visited the forest often. Last Saturday I saw a shadow figure running from the area where the UFO statue is. Alex has taken a number of strange images on these visits there. Now, Rendlesham receives quite a number of visitors for all sorts of reasons. And of course, many go to see the place where a UFO was said to have crashed a number of years ago. Others visit to walk in the woods with the children or their dogs. It's a popular place with families and a nice area to be as a whole. You'll see hikers and bike riders, bird watchers, bushcrafters and wood schools and the odd paranormal group. There's a growing number of people who are experiencing the weird and the unexplained at Rendlesham. One man, Miles Ellis, was out doing his favourite hobby when his life changed forever, and he said, I was in Rendlesham Forest as one of my hobbies is geocaching. I was placing a container in the forest on the UFO end of the UFO statue that commemorates the landing of the craft. As soon as I got to the statue, the woods went silent and the birds stopped singing. In fact, it was unusually quiet. And then I got the feeling that I was being watched from the other side of the trail. As I went past the information board, just for a second, something caught my eye. And there was a tall man-like figure, and he was standing on the other side away from me. Immediately, he went to the nearest tree, but I could see his head. And then I got a feeling that it knew that I was watching it, and it was watching me too. I was so freaked out seeing this figure, I immediately left the vicinity. I couldn't get out of there quick enough. As I was speed walking away from there, I heard a stress call from the birds, and I could hear branches breaking and a lot of snapping noises like there was chaos in the woods. I don't mind if you share my encounter with everyone. I've been watching your YouTube videos and I have seen all of the people who share their experiences. So I had to come forward and share my encounters in the forest with you too. I know that other people have seen it in Rendlesham Forest. Miles Ellis. Now, Miles mentioned an eerie silence that came over the woods. All the birds stopped singing, and he felt as though he was being watched from within the trees. Now, Miles is not the only person to have experienced that. As I said, a number of people contacted me, and all of the experiences seem to happen around that UFO statue or on the woods that just goes around it. So in 2008, there was a lady named Sancha, and she said, I saw your post about the tall figure of a man that people report seeing at Rendlesham Forest. That happened to my husband and I when we were there in 2008. We lived near Rendlesham, decided to walk the UFO trail. Everything was fine at first. And it was when we got to the heart of the forest where the statue is, he suddenly went very dark and eerily silent. Now, there were no sounds at all. No birds were singing. There was no noise from any dog walkers. Just an eerie silence. It was a very unnerving experience, and we definitely felt watched by something or someone when we were there. We couldn't get back to the car park fast enough. I wouldn't willingly go back there. Now, it was only an hour or so until I heard from the next person who wanted to share the very same experience as Shanda and Miles. And this witness said, I've been following your channels for a while as I have a fascination with Bigfoot and other similar creatures. Seeing the report you shared from the man who had a strange encounter in Rendlesham Forest, I had to share my own experience of the place with you. For background, I'm fascinated by ufology, and I think the Rendlesham incident to be one of the most authentic encounters there is. I've always wanted to go there, but it's an awful long way from where I live. But I finally ended up in the area for a long weekend in January of 2022. Now, this was in late January, so there was an early dusk. I arrived about 3 o'clock on a cold, sunny day. Obviously, there were a few people about. I walked around looking for all of the sites related to the UFO incident. But what I kept noticing more was these weird, unnatural tree falls, like branches broken high up. Things like that. The more I walked around, the more I thought it was a forest in West Virginia. And if it was, it'd scream Sasquatch to me. At this point, I became very spooked, as the forest was very, very quiet, and I had the overwhelming sense of being watched. I just felt the compelling need to get out of there. I never actually saw anything or anyone, but it was the most uncomfortable feeling. I would say the whole place has a uncomfortable feeling to it, like it's somebody else's territory. I'm convinced there's something else living there. I hope this is of interest to you, Deb. I might have some photos still somewhere if you want them, but they could take some time finding them now. Now, geocaching is a popular hobby, and over the years I've received reports from geocachers across the country who are reporting similar experiences to the witnesses at Rendlesham. Now, in the northeast of England, there are two cases very close together in an area where we have had several UFO, paranormal, and cryptid reports. And another geocacher was scared out of an area, and he actually contacted me and he said, "Hi Deb, I hope you're well. I've only recently discovered your YouTube channel, and it has really caught my attention when you mentioned some cases in the northeast of England. I'm from the Concert area, so the encounters with the wild man near Stanley, Beamish and Conte, plus the Bigfoot-type creature spotted in Hamsterley Forest, are of interest to me, as they're right on my doorstep. I grew up very close to the Beamish Woods, and my parents also grew up in that area. There have always been legends and stories about creatures in those woods for as far back as I can remember, and the woods are also said to be haunted by the ghost of the Grey Lady. There have been many sightings of black panthers, and even a werewolf on one occasion, to my knowledge. Usually the stories spread by dog walkers in the early hours of the morning are reporting seeing these strange creatures. I would love to chat to some of these witnesses. If you're one of them," he said, "or know one of them, please get in touch." The church you mentioned, Deb, in the second encounter along the coast to coast road, we spoke about it in your video earlier this year. It's one I know very well. I remember you saying it was a local lad on a bike that was passing the church when he saw a tall, dark figure watching him and felt a sudden feeling of dread come over him. I used to walk past that church every day on the way to work, and I've had that feeling of being watched there many times, but I've never seen anything. I did, however, have an experience near Chopwell Woods, which was very strange. I used to have a hobby called geocaching. It's kind of like a giant treasure hunt with secret containers hidden by people all over the world. It works like this: someone gives you the coordinates of a location, and you have to find the treasure left there by them. My friend and I decided to do a very unique one, which was designed to be done only at night for reasons that will become clear. The little containers we had to find were hidden somewhere off the River Derwent Walk, which goes between Consett and Newcastle, and it's a cycle track. Now, the containers had a reflective coating on them, so we had our torches. And if, you look for the tins by shining the torch and waiting for the container to reflect, it makes it much easier to find them. As we were looking for one can in particular, which was set about 100, 150 yards off into the trail, we both stopped dead in our tracks suddenly. We could hear noises moving in the brush around us, and the footsteps were quite close to us. The noises stopped slightly after we stopped and stood still. So we knew it wasn't us making the noise, but we still passed it off as just being a deer or a fox or something natural like that. So we continued searching, but then it happened again, only about a minute later this time. So again we stopped, and a couple of seconds later, it stopped. We both got this horrible feeling, and it came on really quickly from nowhere. I can only describe it as dread, an abject feeling of dread, like something really bad was going to happen. We called out loudly to see if anyone was in there, but there was no answer. It all seemed too quiet, and we were really uncomfortable staying in the area. And after that, we called it a night, stopped searching. Fear got the best of us, and we headed back to the car and just got out of there. I still have no idea what it was that was moving around us, but it just really didn't feel right. I had the feeling of being watched before, but this was completely different. It felt like a warning to get out of there. Now, after releasing this experience, I was contacted by another guy with the same hobby who also lives in the same local area. And he said, I just found your channel and I was watching your video about a guy geocaching in the area in the northeast of England. Strange thing is, me and my friend were geocaching in the woods near there, Chopwell Woods, at night. We found some really weird stuff. There were skulls hanging up in the trees and strange shelters made from branches and leaves. Now, we didn't see any cryptids or anything like that, but the whole woods gave us an eerie feeling, and there was definitely something living out there. Now, this report is within a mile of another creepy report from two men who saw what they described as a red-eyed thing, and they said they'll never forget that. And that happened in Ebchester, 2009. This sighting of a set of strange eyes was reported on the Mysterious Britain website, and it features two local men named Liam and Carl and their strange encounter during a drive after a night out. It happened in Ebchester, County Durham. It took place in October of 2009, and here is the account in the words of one witness, Liam. Liam said, well, basically, a friend and I were leaving the pub that night, but we're not quite ready to hit the hay. So we jumped in my car and went for a little adventure. We decided to go down a road we've always wondered about when we passed it, but we've never driven down that way. By now, it was about 1 a.m. in the morning. It was really dark. So I had my full beams on all the way until we come to these two isolated abandoned houses. And as we pass them, my buddy Carl shouts for me to stop the car. And all he does is just gaze at this odd doorway at one of the houses. And in the doorway, around 7 feet off the ground, are two unmistakable eyes. And they were unmistakable by the way they were set. Anyone on seeing this, would be frightened. And that fear, it was like a ton of bricks travelling at 100 miles an hour. I turned the car slightly so the beams hit the door and this figure, and it just shot off like nothing I've ever known. Its reaction was so fast, I can't put it into words. Carl, being a bit drunk, decides to get out of the car and approach the doorway. So I pull the car forward to face the door, just in case something happened. And that way I could put the car between Carl and whatever this thing was. Carl starts to walk through the door, and I try to whisper him, come back. He's in there about 10 seconds, and he explodes through the doorway, dives on the bonnet, and blasts into the car. And he's screaming and stuttering, there's half a fucking sheep in there, Liam. There's something on the field running at the house. Go, go. Wasting no time, I started reversing like there was nothing stopping me. I turned the car around, and he wasn't kidding. Something was running after us. I own an imported Celica GT, and I didn't care if I damaged it. I was mounting 3 feet up the banks and verges trying to turn it round and get away from this thing. Since then, I've researched every day trying to find what it could be. 5 months later, I took my partner down there in broad daylight, and she just knew it wasn't a safe thing. She absolutely flipped. She made me turn the car around before we were anywhere near the houses. So if I can get any info and enlightenment on this, I'd be ever so appreciative. Thanks, Liam. Now, the mention in the earlier report of strange animal carcasses hanging in trees in an area where there are several cryptid reports, both wildman and dogman, reminded me of a case in Yorkshire, which is just south of these reports here in the northeast. And this came into me in 2012, and he said, around maybe 12 years ago, I was riding along the Harlan Way between Wetherby and Spother with my friend, and at one point we stopped, and there was something weird in the tree, about waist to chest height. And we got closer. We realised it was some sort of dead animal, although I can't remember exactly what animal it was now. A few metres further along, on the opposite side of a relatively narrow path, there was another animal hanging in the branches there, and just opposite, and yet a little further, another dead animal, all placed at the same height. I think from memory, perhaps they were like rabbit, chicken, and fox, something like that. There may have been a fourth animal, but I'm not sure now. It was just really distressing. It was very strange. I did consider perhaps this could have been some sort of ritual. Well, a year later, I read in the Yorkshire Evening Post that this wasn't an isolated incident. And I wrote to their letters page to add my information to it. So more people must have experienced coming across things like this. Now, in that area, within a short radius, there are a number of other reports that could fit in with all of our cases here tonight. The first case is one I took many years ago, when the map was still hanging up on my wall, and I was learning how to Google. It takes me right back to the early days of BBR and the joys of finding others who also saw what I saw. And I remember when me and Ian first met, we were almost finishing each other's sentences. And I know I've been doing this a long time, but every new report that comes in is just as exciting as they were in the beginning. But the beginning reports hold a special place in my heart. This is where I was learning my craft. And it was between me and Ian that we realised that they would have to be using the green corridors to skirt around the towns and the villages. And that made perfect sense. And Ian challenged me to get from his area to my area without hitting any of the towns. And we were able to do that. So him coming forward was just so validating for me. And his experience happened in 1998. And he said, it's taken me a long time to come forward with what happened to me that day. But I feel that I'm ready to finally tell all. It happened years ago, probably October 98, when myself and my family lived in a rural area of Yorkshire in a village called Bramham. It's more of a rural area, lots of farms, a quarry, some rivers and streams. I like to walk my dog around the farm, lanes and tracks, especially when I finish work in the evening. It's a good way for me to wind down and get some air. On that particular evening, I was out walking with my dog River down a long farm track, a route we often take, and a place we've never experienced anything other than a normal dog walk in the countryside. It was early evening, so it was about 8 p.m, and it had just gotten dark. Myself and the dog were just walking along, let the dog off the lead so we could have a run, as we were about half a mile up this single farm track by then. No animals or people around. I just let him have a sniff around. And as I walked, the dog was just doing his own thing. It was quiet, no signs of anyone. I was enjoying the walk, and there are hedges on both sides of the track the whole way, so it's hard to see clearly into the fields. And there are some woods sitting to one side of me. And as we walked even further along the track, the dog suddenly stopped. He froze. He looked at the track in the direction we were walking. He must be aware of something up there, as he starts growling and acting all strange. His hackles are up, and he's growling continuously at this point. I'm thinking maybe it's a fox, this is the way he's acted before if we ever came across one. So I'm looking at the track, trying to see a fox or a cat or something. I can't see anything. There's no animal anywhere. I can see how worked up he is. And now he's going mad and he's barking really loudly. I carried on walking past him at this point, so he was a short way behind me. So I turned to look at him and try and calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. And if anything, he's getting worse. Something had really spooked him. So I turned to look back up the track. I couldn't believe my eyes. A massive creature was standing there looking back in our direction. It must have walked between 8 to 9 footsteps out into the field track before I saw it. And now I can see it clearly, and it can see us. And at this point, I'm in complete shock at what I'm seeing. I kept thinking, it can't be real. I honestly don't think my brain could process what I was seeing. Because standing there in a field track was a huge creature of some kind. It was massively built. It was about 5 foot wide across the shoulder, about 8 feet tall. I couldn't make out any facial features, as the face was hidden in shadow, but I could make out that it was covered in hair. It was standing about 30 metres from me, so I could see it clearly, but I couldn't make out distinctive features, even at that distance. It made no sound, and I didn't smell or hear anything. To my disbelief, at that moment, the dog ran straight towards it, barking. But he stopped, about 15 metres away from this thing, and he was clearly scared, and just didn't know how to react. He'd completely forgotten about me, And that's, a first for my dog. Usually he'd put my needs first. Maybe that's what he was doing, as by now he's in between me and this creature. I could tell I was the last thing on my dog's mind at this point. So the dog barks a few more times and then he just turns and runs straight past me and back up the farm track to safety, the way we came in. No doubt now you can imagine how stunned I was. The whole incident only lasted seconds. I was just standing there paralysed and trying to process what I'd seen. I must have been in shock because what I did next, I did without conscious thought. And I don't even know why I did it. But as I stood there looking at this creature, I nod my head and say, all right, I know that's crazy, but that's what I did. And then I just somehow calmly turned around and just started walking back down the field track after my dog, all the time listening for this creature coming behind me. I was completely shitting myself. I think I acted without thinking, as I never looked back up the track until I got to the dog. I couldn't see anything in the field anymore when I did. I didn't report this for years and years, until other people came forward in secret and started to share their accounts online with each other. I had no idea what a Bigfoot was back then. Now, years on, seeing them online, I can say without a doubt it looked like it was an exact match to that. And the creature in question was a similar shape to the usual Sasquatch shape that you see. So, like tall, broad shoulders, huge chest, and hairy. And the face was in shadows, so no features were seen. But Ian said he realised now that the creature did look left into the tree line. It had looked to the left very sharply, as if trying to hide the movement, which made him wonder if there was another group or another creature back in the trees he couldn't see. And maybe the one individual Ian spotted was caught out in a field alone. It's not the only report from the area that describes a very strange, hairy creature. Now, that case happened in the 2000s. I was speaking to the witness, and he said, I've been telling my workmates about BBR and what you do for a while now, and some have shown little interest, while others have been really interested and have asked me questions about what we do and the cases that come in that we investigate. I was telling them Ian's story and what happened to him in Boston Spa. And one of my colleagues, Mark, told me the following story about an experience he had in Boston Spa in the 2000s. He said it was about 20 years ago. He lived in Wetherby and he had a friend who was into camping. This friend and three others decided to go camping overnight on the site of an old railway line that used to run from Wetherby to Leeds. The line goes through Thorpe Arch and Tadcaster. It's now a cycle route and a pathway that runs to a nearby woodland. I think it's called Hall Wood. Well, they were there, set up camp, built a fire, did the usual camping stuff. It was summer, and the nights were still light, and they had a campfire lit. So the area was well lit up. One of them noticed a huge figure trying to get over the barbed wire fence. He shouted to the others to look, and as they described the creature they saw as huge and hairy, they didn't know what it was. They thought it may have been some kind of escaped bear from a zoo or a circus. It was really big, stocky, and covered in hair. And all four of them saw it and panicked and fled. And they went running home. They didn't stop until they got safely to the door. They left the fire and their tents and equipment and just ran. And then we have a case that I'd like to finish on tonight. And that is the case that happened at Jackdaw Crags. Our witness in this case is called Kev. And he said, hello, Debbie. Until recently, I thought that Bigfoot and dogman type creatures being reported was something that only happened in North America. I'm a history nut, and I'm surprised I'd not made the connection from the green man to the wild man of medieval times, often called the wood wouse or the wood woose. I didn't connect them to Sasquatch Bigfoot creatures. But then, by chance, I read some accounts on Facebook, and it dawned on me I may have had an experience with something. In fact, I may have had two, but I'll go into the second one later. Now, knowing the habits and behaviours and hearing the accounts, it's made me reevaluate a situation that's puzzled me for years. I live in Boston Spa, near a place called Wetherby, which is a small village next to the River Wharfe in Yorkshire. I grew up on a council estate called West End, and it's your typical new build, lots of green belt land, it's next to the river. In fact, you can walk from Rotherby through Boston, then onto Tadcaster, all the time sticking close to the river. Walk along the riverbank, and you see that it's bordered by agricultural land and old woodlands, limestone cliffs, and there's some deep, treacherous slopes down into the river valley. Something to note that you've suggested before, where we have limestone, we have cave systems, so this area could have many of them, Deb. As a kid, myself and my friends would go up to a small woodland valley called Jackdaw Crag and play for hours and hours. It used to be covered in bluebells, had little earth paths going all over it, that crisscrossed and went down to the riverside. And if you were lucky, in summer, you'd see kingfishers at work and watch the fish leaping out of the water. It was a perfect place to go and play. I went for a walk. I just wandered down to the river's edge. I sat on a bench, long since eroded away, and just watched the river as dusk came, and it slowly became evening. I was sitting quietly, just on my own, not really moving at all. I remember hearing the odd breaking of branches, and I just ignored it, thinking it was a small wild animal or, something. At this time, I'd never heard of Bigfoot. I wasn't worried or spooked, and to be honest, I'd all but ignored it. But then I had that awful feeling come over me that I was being watched. You know the one? It just comes over you suddenly, and you're aware you're no longer alone. I knew I was being watched by someone or something that I couldn't see. I couldn't shake that feeling. I knew with certainty that I wasn't alone, and I could feel a hair on my neck stand up. I felt uncomfortable. I started to notice a really bad smell, like wet wool and muddy water, or water that had stagnated, or something. At first, I blamed it on the river. It'd been a hot summer, and the river levels had gone down a bit, so I thought it was just that. But that awful feeling of something watching me remained. It just stayed with me throughout, so I just decided to go home. I could have gone up a steep path and walked the woods to the housing estate, but for some reason, I felt I had to go the way I came into the area, so that's what I did. The path was very wide and open, and even in twilight, I would be able to see anything or anyone who was standing in there or walking alongside me. I kept hearing noises to my left side. Whatever was watching me that evening seemed to be shadowing me, and I quickly left the woods and got to the road as fast as I could, which ran eventually to a remote farm, and then on past the housing estate in another direction. It freaked me out. I have never set foot in Jackdaw Crag since that day. I could not make head nor tail of the event. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't see anything out there. I felt scared and silly at the same time. He said, if you follow the river going towards Wetherby, you go through lots of woodlands and fields, and some of which were never utilised, they're just left to go wild. If you follow that route, you'll eventually come to a place called Flint Mills. And when I went there, I was there before the Jackdaw Crag encounter. I spoke to an elderly couple who were really friendly, and they showed me the mill workings and a water wheel at the old water mill. They took me to a place and showed me a smiling painting of a young woman. They didn't know her name. It was only a small picture, and it was placed in an upstairs window of an abandoned house. The story known to the couple and shared with me was a really sad tale. Apparently, in the 1800s, the daughter of the miller had vanished and was never seen again. She was taken by a kelpie, it was said, or a water demon that lived in the river. Whether the poor girl had slipped or fallen into the river and drowned, I'm not sure, and cannot say one way or another. But her body was never found. I tell the story because in reading up on wildmen stories in history, there are similar tales from around the country of young maidens being taken, and I'm curious as to why they blame the death on a water demon. He said, my second possible encounter happened, and I was intrigued to find a sighting in Bramham, Yorkshire, that you shared, where a gentleman and his dog saw a Sasquatch-like creature on a farm track. Could you get in touch with him and share my contact details if possible, as I'd love to find out whether it was East Bramham on the Toulston Road that leads to Tadcaster, or the West of Bramham, which leads to Wothersham. Both areas are remote farming areas with very, very few houses. If it's on the West Bramham side, then I think it could be part of a green corridor that runs down the area, and they may use that. The route divides in two, just before Wothersham, which is a couple of houses in the middle of nowhere. The other corridor is a wooded area called Hetchel Woods near Bardsey, which can also lead to the River Wharfe. And Hetchel is a protected woodland. It has a flowing stream and it's classed as ancient woodland. I've spoken to the people who have permission to do all sorts of woodcraft things there. They've never noticed anything unusual. But as the man said, they weren't really aware of anything or to look out for anything, you know. On the day of my second experience, I continued along the muddy track, which was narrower. Hedges are taller there, and there was a noise on the other side of them. I couldn't see anything through the hedgerows, and then I heard another noise on the other side of the hedge again. I was convinced I was being followed again, as the noises followed me the further down I went. At first I presumed it was cows or sheep at the time, but thinking back, whatever it was making sure it was heard. No, not the normal behaviour of an animal. I got to a point where the Roman road was blocked by undergrowth. I couldn't get any further, which was a pity because I had to go to the river, and I've been able to see that Roman road and if there was anyone there. So I turned back and again the noises started and continued till I reached the Tadcaster Boston Road. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was an overactive imagination on my part, but it felt very similar to my earlier experience at Jackdaw Crags. Kev. So most of our cases tonight are in British woodlands, near waterways, when something or someone suddenly feels the presence, that someone's there watching them. And even when they walk, they get shadowed in the woodlands. Cases like this all across the UK and all across the world, really. And a lot of thought and studies have gone into this feeling of being watched. And even the science study said that then normally your brain's picking up on thousands of messages that are going on around you without you even thinking about it. And that feeling would have kept you alive back in the day, when you were sat hunched up waiting to hunt. Your instincts, your senses are heightened, aren't they? So if anybody walks into that personal space of yours, you would feel it, you would recognise it. Some of our witnesses said that the hair on the back of their necks went up, like a dog when its hackles go up. We are animals at base and we pick up on all of the things that are happening around us. It's just our brain, our front brain, 2024 brain, kind of dismisses all of that. So if you're out in the woodland and you're walking your dog and you suddenly feel like something's watching you from the trees, I would trust that instinct. If you're hearing something in your head or your body that says, get out, you're not welcome, you shouldn't ignore that and push on. Just because it's 2024 doesn't mean that we are not adapted to a natural wild environment. So if I'm walking somewhere and I suddenly get that feeling of dread, or my stomach drops, or the hairs on the back of my neck go up, I take note and I back out. And a lot of people say the same about their dogs. They might not pick up on it, but the dog does. In the case of Ian and River, River was onto that creature before Ian even spotted it. He knew it was a danger and he didn't know how to deal with it. So it's not something the dog recognised. He didn't know what to do. We've got a dog there that's got an owner and he's just completely forgot about the owner and he's faced with this thing and it tries barking, it tries putting itself between Ian and this thing and it runs because it's frightened, and that's a natural ability, a natural feeling that dogs don't reason away. We don't tell dogs that they're silly or wrong or it's just their imagination. We accept when they go into a woodland and their heckles raise that something's wrong, and we should learn to accept that about ourselves. And as I said before, the millions of pounds have been spent on scientific studies to work out why humans feel like they are being watched. And we could have saved them those thousands of pounds because the answer was that most of the time they are being watched. It's what your brain picks up on, And I think if it's a deer or if it's a sheep, we wouldn't be getting these accounts. I think we do that to ourselves to kind of lessen the fear and kind of talk it away. And like in the last case at Jackdaw Crag, you'll watch something in years' time and you'll think, hang on a minute, that was the same as what happened to me that day. Could I possibly be dealing with the same creature? A lot of these areas are the old railway lines, and those railway lines from the tip of Scotland all the way down to the toe of England, those lines have been turned into walkways for people to ride their bikes on, take the children out on, leisure facilities. They're not lit at night. And lots of them, because they're all railway tracks, have very steep embankments that are not really looked after. They were in the beginning. It was a great idea when they went in. But obviously the councils can't afford to send somebody out there every year and cut them back. And I tend to get a lot of reports from areas like that. So as I say, in the daytime, they're lovely. We have them here, had them in where we used to live. And you can go quite far on them, and it cuts out the town. It takes you through the town in this like little embankment where, we studied. And I've spoke to people who have had experiences in places exactly like that. I did a talk in Hull, I think it was 2020. And one of the ladies in the audience said that she was worried because her daughter and her school friend had to walk home down one of these areas, and that they noticed a strange leaf man that was watching them from the bushes, using the bushes to hide himself. And she didn't mean a human male. She meant something that they didn't recognise. Green man, woodwose, the British Bigfoot, whatever name you want to put on it, the wild man. That's what he is to me. I think of him as a wild man. And he's out there going about his everyday business. And every now and again, we see them, and it's happened for centuries. But it doesn't stop it being scary. And it's understandable when these people run from the area. I did exactly the same thing. Primal feeling takes over conscious thought. So you're not thinking in a natural way. You're not breaking it down into small segments and working through them. You see danger and your body does fight, flight, or freeze. You'll do one of the three. And for many of us, it's run. And for some brave buggers, it's walk forward and face it. And for most of people, you just freeze. You absolutely freeze. Your brain doesn't know what, everything shuts down in that moment. And there are other things at play. If this was just an imagination, somebody making something up, why would the birds go quiet? And the woods would go completely silent. And we hear that so often, don't we? Everything was fine until suddenly the woods went completely silent. And that doesn't happen unless there is a predator around. Every now and again, people will say a squirrel started to bark. It was alarm calling, or the birds were alarm calling, and that put me onto it. Because these creatures are acting on their natural ability, and nobody expects them to explain it away like they do with us humans. And we have to get back into that habit. If you're sat fishing and you feel something is watching you from the woods behind you, take note of it. Don't feel silly for a natural instinct that's as natural as blinking or coughing or sneezing, smelling something, seeing something, touching something. It's a sense, and it's there for a reason. When you're a female, it's really, really sad, but you learn very early on, and I mean like toddler age, that you have to keep yourself safe around certain individuals. As you grow up and you get older, you realise that walking that pathway is probably not the best idea because somebody could be hiding down there. Now, we don't ridicule people for feeling fear in that moment. We accept it and we say that that was a valid choice that you made. You kept yourself safe and you went in the opposite direction. So why would it be different if you can't see what's frightening you? If you're walking along and there's something in the bushes and you're picking up on it, we shouldn't be telling people that they're silly or overreacting. We should be saying, good on you. You heard it, you felt it, you understood it, and you got yourself out of there, because it's happening more and more. Cryptid sightings are on a massive incline. They are coming in faster than anything, and not just to me, to researchers all across the world. Why are these dogman creatures showing themselves so often to people? We're working a case at the moment with Daisy, and you'll hear about that next week. She's going to sit down and let me interview her, where you've got an ordinary farm, on the Surrey-Sussex border. She's experienced an upright, tall, walking creature. When she first saw him, he was down on all fours. But she was walking with her dog in an area she knows well. And she turned a corner and came face to face with a creature probably 18 years ago that we think is still on the land and is still interacting to this day. I mean, what about Fred? If Fred took the dog out for a walk and he had that sudden feeling of dread, knowing what he saw in the window, and if you don't know that case, go back. It's called an elderly man sees a dog run at the window. We accept that Fred understands animals. He's a stockman. He's worked on farms his entire life, but he knew what he saw that night was not something of this world. It wasn't something like a dog just stood up on its back legs. He described it as a werewolf. I take these reports from people consistently, all of the time, and the same questions are asked by all of them. What was it? Will I see it again? Is it going to come and get me? Did I do the right thing? Was I just overreacting? And the answer to all of them is we all have these questions. So you might not put your experience down to a cryptid. You might be in a dark woodland and something shadows you, but those feelings of fear are relevant and they're true to you. And going forward, I'd like to normalise that as best as I can, especially being the girl who pushed somebody over and ran away. I have a lot of karma to fix, don't I? But I have an exciting case coming for you next week, as I've just said, and some really good ones coming in the weeks after. So I put something out every week, as you know, at the same time. I'd love you to come and join us. Jump in the chats and get involved in our community. But until then, enjoy your weekend. Good night, everyone.